I met Dan Kitchen through Bill Smith. Bill Smith owns the arcade Billy's Midway Arcade in Hawthorne, New Jersey, which is a pretty awesome arcade with over 100 arcade cabinets, a bunch of pinball machines. He told me one day that a guy named Dan Kitchen from the original Activision crew came by and said hi. I was like, oh, I played this game Ghostbusters on Atari, and I played a few of his other games like Bart Simpson versus the World and a few other ones. But I came back a few days later. I saw him there, and he was such a nice guy, a great guy. He's actually a very big influence on me. He's very passionate about what he does. He's done so many games from Atari to your phone to many other platforms. And honestly, he's what got me back to collecting on Atari.
So yeah, the day that I met Dan Kitchen was real interesting. I had been out doing some other work, came in, my employee had already checked him in, says to me as I walk in, oh yeah, there's a guy in the back, he's doing some research for a game or something, he wanted to play pinball. So I said, oh, that's cool, all right, no problem. So I'm going about my day doing a little repair work here and there, and I'm up front talking to my employee again, and this guy comes up and says, wow, this is a great place, and starts asking me how I come up with the idea and wanting to do this. And it turned into a very interesting conversation. I had no idea who I was talking to. And so mentioned something about Atari games and Activision games. And he says, oh, that's, I used to work for Activision. And I was like, really? And knowing the way Activision was with putting every programmer's name on the box and on the cartridge, I said, what's your name? And he says, Dan Kitchen. And I almost had to get scraped off the floor because I was blown away. Here was a guy who had actually been either the programmer or involved in programming or producing many of the games that I loved playing when I was growing up. And one of my favorite Sega Master System games was one that he was involved with when they were one town over as Absolute Entertainment. So it's very interesting.
I mean, I knew of him, and I knew he was a manager at Majesco, which is about 20 miles from where I live. And at the time, I was working for ADP, Automatic Data Processing, as a technical writer. And I would have loved to work for Majesco as a manual writer. And when ADP laid me off in June of 2001, I said, oh, now I can go to Majesco. And I must have met Dan at a show and discussed it with him, and he had no positions open, so. And then I didn't see Dan for years, and then he started turning up again the last few years now, pushing his new game, and we became friends.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
All right, Dan.
So you're not going to be standing, you're just going to be in the off camera.
Yeah, either way. Yep.
Okay.
All right, say your name and what you do.
My name is Dan Kitchen, and I am a video game designer.
So what got you into making video games?
My father was always interested in electronics. He was always into antique radios. He built radios when he was in his teens throughout the 30s and then the 40s. And he got all of us interested in electronics early on. And from electronics, we then springboarded from there into our love of toys and games. And eventually, I bought an Apple II computer for Christmas in 1980, learned how to program, taught myself how to do it. And my older brothers were just getting into the field, so we all started, and the rest is history.
Were you glad you started with Apple II instead of a different brand?
You know, we started with an Apple II primarily because it was open. The actual case was open, and you actually could create different boards to plug into the system. And we were engineers, so we knew we would want to get to the roots and to the guts of the system. That seemed to be the perfect system for what we wanted to do at the time. We were designing electronic toys and games, and a lot of them we would prototype on small boards that we would plug into the Apple and then write code to run them. And the open case and the access to the circuit board allowed us to do that type of engineering.
Before Dan worked at Activision, he worked at a few other companies, such as Wixted and Imaginative. When he was at Wixted, he wired prototypes for his projects that he was working on. And after he left Wixted, he created Crystal Caverns and Crime Stopper for the Apple II, which were really cool text-adventure kind of games. So, what got you into Activision?
Interestingly enough, bought our first Activision game, I guess, back in 1980, which was skiing. And my brother and I were working at a place in Morristown with another chap who ended up writing Hero with us. And he came in one day and said, I bought some Atari games that aren't Atari. And we were like, wow. And we plugged it in, and it was amazing how beautiful the graphics were, how well it played. And we were hooked on Activision games. And at that design company, Gary, my brother, started looking at the Atari 2600 as a possible outlet to make products for. At the time, there was only Atari and Activision. Nobody else was in business to do that. Gary back engineered the Atari, learned how the system worked, and actually wrote his first game, which was Space Jockey. And the company we worked for made a deal with US Games to distribute the game. And at that point, when the game was released, Gary and I moved to his basement to start our own company. And about that time, soon afterward, he got the contract to write Donkey Kong for Coleco. And in the midst of doing that, we went to a consumer electronics show in Las Vegas, I think in January of '82, or it may have been June of '81. And we met with Activision, and Gary explained who he was and what we had done, and they were fascinated that Gary was learning the Atari on his own, and they liked the work he had done, and so we got a chance to meet with them, interview, and became part of Activision.
So while Gary was making Donkey Kong on Atari, he was like, what kind of company should I work for next? So he looked into Activision. Before Dan and Gary worked at Activision, Gary grabbed the pictures of the creators of Activision, such as David Crane, Alan Miller, Larry Kaplan, and Bob Whitehead. Gary scribbled the images on there, and then Gary taped pictures of him and Dan on the pictures of those four guys, hung that picture up on the wall, and says, we're going to work with these guys one day. And I thought that was really cool. That's very motivational. That's a cool vision board for a dream, like to work for Activision. That's really awesome. Dan and Gary went for interviews for Activision, and there he met David Crane and Alan Miller. Alan Miller made Ice Hockey, and David Crane made Pitfall. And they were big. And Activision was huge at the time. You know, they were worth millions and millions of dollars. When they went for the interview, Alan Miller battled against Dan Kitchen in Ice Hockey. Ice Hockey was a great game by Alan Miller. The graphics were great. Dan was really good at that game. And Dan whooped his ass. And after they were done, Alan said, let's have these guys work for us. Which is amazing. And, you know, they actually did. They actually did work for them, and they were great. They made such great games. Such as Dan made Crackpots, Gary made Keystone Capers, Pressure Cooker, and many others.
I remember when I first read about Activision, it was in Video Magazine. There was a column, Arcade Alley, which was eventually done by Arnie Katz and Bill Kunkel. And that's where I first read about Activision coming out, and it was so cool because you know, it's a new company. I mean, that's what started me, is because I'm buying every single game for the Atari VCS. So when I found out there was a new company coming out with games, I said, oh, more way for me to waste my money. But what was cool, when they had the first 4 games come out, they had boxes that looked just like the Atari boxes. I wasn't happy with the cartridges that much because they had sponges in them, where the Atari cartridge had a little trap door that opened to insert it, so dust couldn't get in. The Activision cartridge had sponges. That to me made it look cheap. The manuals were cool because they told who the designers were. We never saw this before. But the games themselves, the graphics, they were just incredible. They were beautiful colors, and it was like a world of difference compared to what Atari was putting out. And they were just amazing.
My first Activision game was Crackpots, which I wrote in 1982.
Crackpots was a game released for Activision on Atari in 1983, where it's kind of like a boom but reversed. You're dropping pots on a bunch of bugs. It's really fun. Graphically, it's beautiful. It's very addicting. It's the first like Atari game that really pulled me in the way it did. I could play for hours and not get bored. It's really, really awesome. It came out a little late in the Atari life. That's when the video game crash was about to happen, so it wasn't that popular. But that's why I like it a lot, because it's underrated, and I prefer that over some of the more popular ones such as Pitfall and a few other ones.
No, it's a very good looking game. The way the sidewalk looks and the building looks, stuff dropping and avoiding it. It's a backwards Kaboom, I think.
Exactly. I had a few friends over to try out Crackpots, and they gave their opinion on what they think of the game.
After playing it a while, I'd probably give it like about a 9, because it's just like it's so easy to pick up. You understand the goal right away, and like you get better and better at it. There's no like getting stuck. I like the sound. It sounds really interesting. For its time, it was I don't know. I wasn't around in 1983, but I'd say it's probably a pretty innovative game for 1983.
What do you like about this game?
I like the sound effects. Like the sound effects are like it sounds like blocks. Like when you play Super Smash 64. I do gotta say, like I do agree. The game's like layout is like basic. Like I definitely see that point. But the sound effects like really get me. And I like how it's like addicting.
I think it adds to the charm, which is
Yeah.
you know what you have to do.
Exactly, yeah.
There's no hidden features.
Yeah.
That you're like, oh, I should have known that about like an hour ago. But no, you get it within the first 5 minutes, which is important
Yeah.
for an arcade game, you know?
I agree with you.
Yeah, Josh, you were fast. You got this in like 2 minutes.
My favorite Dan Kitchen game, well, my favorite Dan Kitchen Atari game is Crackpots. It's initially a simple game. It gets out of control really fast, much like a reverse Kaboom. And that was something Dan and I discussed one time. I said, Dan, why didn't you use a paddle controller? It just felt, like the same kind of a dynamic. And he was saying about, there seemed to be too many paddle games or whatever, and that's why they went with joystick. And joystick works. There's just a certain part of me that always wants to go and grab a paddle and try it.
Is that one of your best achievements?
I think it is. It's certainly one of my favorite games, because when I see it and play it, it kind of brings back the whole aspects of Activision and what it felt like to be part of them at the time, and it was a very exciting, fun time in my career.
What are your top 5 games you made for Activision?
Well, I'd have to say Crackpots, Kung Fu Master, Ghostbusters, probably followed by, I worked with a chap on Commando and Akari Warriors. I would have to say those are probably my favorites. I programmed for a lot of systems, but I have to say, going back to the beginning, it's the Atari 2600. It's the most challenging. It has 128 bytes of RAM, so it has no real screen memory. We have to create the screen on the fly as we race the TV raster across the screen, literally counting machine cycles. At every moment, it's on the TV screen. And it's really challenging and almost like designing a puzzle when you work on it. So that I would have to say is my most enjoyable system. The second one would be the Apple, because that itself had some really unique challenges too.
Kitchen stopped being an Activision employee, he still did some games under contract of Activision. My favorite one is Commando. It's a run and gun shoot 'em up from the arcades from 1985. This one came out in like 1988, 89. And it's a beautiful looking game. It's a later Atari game, so I assume there's more RAM to it, probably 8K RAM, my guess. And there's several stages in this game. The graphics are great, the bombs are cool. There's actually music in it, which is really, really cool. And this was made in New Jersey too, which is really interesting.
Well, after Activision, Gary and I and the team of Activision guys in the Eastern Center, we split off and started Imagineering, which was our development company, again based in Glen Rock, New Jersey. And Imagineering was a services company. We did games for a lot of different publishers, Game Tech, Acclaim, Atari, Activision even hired us to do games. That's actually when I did Kung Fu Master. I actually was separate from Activision, but did it on a contract basis. And that company eventually, we turned that into Absolute Entertainment, a publishing company, because we ended up beginning to publish our own games. When we weren't doing work for other people as services, we would do our own games and eventually publish them ourselves. And after time, that became more lucrative than doing work for other people. So we were able to more and more publish and became a publisher, Absolute Entertainment.
After Dan left Activision, he did a lot of awesome games, such as Crossbow, which is a point-and-click kind of adventure game, Kung Fu Master, which is a side-scrolling beat-em-up game. He did the Simpsons games on NES. He did a lot of awesome games. One of the best games he did after he left Activision, when he was with Absolute, was RC Grand Prix, which is kind of like RC Pro Am on NES, but for the Master System. And in my opinion, it actually plays better, looks better too. And the music's really cool too.
My favorite Dan Kitchen game, not on the Atari though, is RC Grand Prix on the Sega Master System. The only game that he did for the Sega Master System. Part of that is just, it was a really well done game. Anybody who's played the more known RC Pro-Am on the NES knows the concept of the game. I just like the way that they did it on the Master System a little bit better, true to like the typical Sega versus Nintendo rivalry. The Sega games tended to be a little bit more realistic with a lot of things and trying to make like sports and games like that have that extra level of authenticity to them.
Turned it on, and I see this intro screen, and I know what these two cars are because these are the good cars. These were the team associated RC10s that were like the best car you could get at the time. And you can tell because it's got the copper color that sticks out here on the very front. That's the very front of the little chassis pan sticking up with the little associated logo on there, which you can't quite make out. But anyhow, the music's really cool, the game is really cool, and watching the intro screen to see Dan's name pop up and then also see the Glen Rock address where they used to be. We're in Hawthorne. Glen Rock is one town away. So 20-minute walk or a 2-minute car ride, and that's where Dan was making this game with the other guys. So really cool. And the way it was set up where you can actually put your name in so you know who was. So it's kind of like RC Pro-Am on the NES, but it's the Sega Master System. So slightly better graphics, and you eventually do get some power-ups for your car, but you're not shooting at other cars. You're not, attacking other guys with things that'll cripple them, but you'll make your car go faster, which is more like a real radio control car race. Thrilled to have it, and even more thrilled to find out that not only that it's the same Dan Kitchen who did the Activision games, but that he was actually here.
Oh, absolutely. Came out really bad or disappointed you?
You always have games that you make and you look in hindsight, so you wish you had done it differently or a little differently. I'm very proud of Kung Fu Master, although I would have made the hit collision area a bit bigger. I really had no choice but to make jump be the up position in the joystick, and that's a little hard to do to play, but I only had one button at the time. There are other games that I wish I had some more time to go back and have added things, but a lot of the restrictions back then were space. ROM was very expensive, 4K was very expensive, and so we did the best we could within the time we had, because all these games were commercial products, so we had a deadline to get them done so they could become commercially viable.
Now, do you enjoy programming on new computers and new phones?
I do enjoy the coding on the phones, specifically because it's a lot like the old days. I've been involved in different games in my career where I've done games with the Xbox One, for the PS3. Those kind of games take 50, 60 people in a team, even larger. It's a complete orchestration effort to manage the assets, to work with the developers, the artists, to get voiceover talent involved. When you're working with a mobile device, it's almost like the old Atari days. You can actually create a game with a very small team and do a lot of the coding yourself. So I do enjoy working on the newer, smaller systems.
Is it easier to code on a new phone compared to like big game systems?
Well, you're still writing the same kind of code. A lot of the big systems and the phones can use Objective-C and C++. Now we can use JavaScript. So it uses the same, it can use the same core language, but obviously the way the code runs and how it interacts with the hardware is completely different between the two systems.
Do you ever try Python?
I'm sorry?
You ever tried Python?
I have not programmed in Python, but I am familiar with it.
He certainly was very, very active. He started out, much like Gary, doing programming. Writing games when you did it, it was a solo project. Dan moved on into doing production type work as well as programming, and just to be out there and putting all those pieces together. It's kind of like anything else. When you've got a solo project, it's all on you. But when you've got the more complicated games for the more complex systems later on, like the Master System, the Genesis, the Super Nintendo, you needed to have a team. You couldn't just do it yourself. And to be able to be the guy, that orchestrator that's sitting there in the middle of this whole thing and saying, well, here, you do the sound, you do the research on whatever the subject happens to be. There's a certain amount of influence there. I think most of the games that he was known for on the Atari tended to be the ones where they were an arcade game that was ported over to the Atari, except for Crackpots. Whereas the later games were more of a, I don't know how to say it the right way. More of a, like The Simpsons, Bart versus the Aliens kind of a game. These other people's properties that had to be done right and had to be done well for the system that they were released on. So I think having not worked with him during that period, but having played those games and seeing his production credit or his executive production credit, I think he pulled together the guys who were working on it, or the people who were working on those games, and did quite a good job.
What's the oddest game you ever worked on?
I just have to think about. Okay, the oddest game I've ever worked on, which was also a very enjoyable game, was Desert Bus. We had licensed with Penn and Teller to create Penn and Teller Smoke and Mirrors on the Sega CD in 1993. And as part of the game design process, we sat with Penn and Teller for many weeks and months. And in a meeting, Penn happened to say, I want to create the most boring game of all time. And we all laughed and said, hey, we played a lot of boring games. But he said, no, I really want to create the most boring game. And he sat there and stared at the ceiling and said, imagine having to drive a bus from Tucson, Arizona to Las Vegas in real time. And we all chuckled and said it was very funny. And then he started to describe the game, how nothing happens, how you can't just put the controller down, the front alignment isn't good, so you've got to keep steering it on the center of the road, or else if you put down the controller, you're going to go off the side of the road, the game's going to stop, and then you're going to be towed all the way back to Tucson in real time. So you could play the game for 5.5 hours, get on the side of the road, and have to wait 5.5 hours for the bus to be towed back to the beginning to start. That was one of the oddest games, and I have to say, we designed it, we programmed it, we produced it, and I'm pleased to see it has become the cult favorite that it is today.
How long did it take to make?
Well, it was a very simple game. It's probably one of the quickest games we did. You know, we probably had a prototype running on the Sega system in about a month with the graphics, and Penn and Teller did a lot of video shoots for it, as well as the other games in Smoke and Mirrors. Unfortunately, the game was never released, although it was completed and approved by Sega. But that was probably the oddest game that I've worked on. I did also do some code work on the C64 version of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. That was a lot of fun. That probably sums it up for the odd games I've done.
What your new game are you working on?
My new game is Gold Rush, and it's actually based on a game I started at Activision in 1983. After Crackpots, Gary had already shipped Keystone Capers, which was very successful. And I wanted to do a new game, and I thought of a new scenario for the Keystone Cop in Keystone Capers. So I decided to create a train game with Keystone Kelly on the train. And I started writing it and got to the point where it was displayable and it had a little play in it. And at that time, the famous video game crash of 1983 occurred. And soon after that, Activision pulled us off the Atari 2600, wanted us to focus on the Commodore 64 and the other computers of the day. So I took the code, put it away for 30 some years, and eventually 2 years ago found the cartridge in my storage, plugged it in, and it came up, and realized, you know, not only is there somewhat of an interest in retro games, but I'd like to finish the game finally. So that, in essence, became Gold Rush. I didn't call it Keystone Capers 2 because I don't have the rights to the name. I didn't use the same character, Keystone Kelly, because again, I don't have the rights. So I created the same desert scenario with a conductor, and it's almost the same premise I had originally conceived in 1983. You're running around a train looking for gold, and you're avoiding all these baddies that are on the train. And that game will be finished this year and released this year as Dan Kitchen's Gold Rush.
What's your company?
The company will be Activision. That's the publisher of the game. And I've already got a second game in the works that is, again, another Activision-style game. And I'm actually creating these games to pay homage to Activision and to actually resurrect what Activision was in the early days. We had games, we had patches, we had clubs you could join, and we gave the designer credits. So I'm really recreating with Activision what Activision was in the very early days. My second game is called Bon Voyage, and it's a game where you are piloting a luxury liner across the Atlantic, avoiding icebergs and a number of obstacles while you're picking up stranded swimmers from the great Titanic disaster. And that already has some play in it, and it's kind of a cross between Sequest and Barnstorming. So I've got actually a few games that I'm going to be producing in the next year or so under the Activision label.
Will this one be on Atari also?
Bon Voyage will currently be on Atari, but like with Gold Rush, I'm hoping to take it and port it to the mobile and other current platforms so people can enjoy the gameplay on the new systems.
He's a nice guy, and he programs great games, and I believe he's the first of the original programmers, the original VCS programmers, to program a new VCS game. There's been Ed Fry came out with Halo for the 2600, so we have a guy involved with a new game who did an old game. Then, and I forgot the name of the game. There was an arcade game that the original programmer put out a VCS version, and I can't think of the name of it right now. But I don't think any of the original programmers for the 2600 came out with a new game now. And I believe that Dan Kitchen is the first one to do so.
do you think it's going to bring other programmers from the old days back into making new Atari 2600 games?
Well, if they have the time to do it, there's no money involved. They're not going to make a fortune on this. It's if they have the time and the inclination to do it. A lot of them, maybe they don't remember how to do it. I mean, it's not an easy system to program on. You're talking about a language they haven't used in 40 years or so. It would be nice if they do. I mean, I could see David Crane coming up with a new version of Pitfall. But again, do they have the time? Do they want to do this?
Yeah, Dan Kitchen's new game, Gold Rush, is a very good-looking game. I'm very excited about this game. You play as a guy who travels on trains trying to collect gold. And the graphics are beautiful, the background's great. It looks like the old-school Activision games. And it's by Tiki Vision, because Dan has a love for Tikis and Activision, so he put together Tiki Vision. And he put a lot of work into this. I could tell he really loves this. He's very passionate about it. And probably the most excited I am for an Atari game. So I'm very excited for this. And even though it's a new game on an old system, it's cool to have like the rainbow like in Activision back in the day. A patch like used again in the old Activision games when you had the highest score. It's really awesome. And I could see Dan really put a lot of effort into this game. And it's going to be well worth the wait. Gold Rush, how long did that take to make?
Well, you know, Gold Rush, initially I started it and it got to about 3 months when I had a prototype and had to stop. I found the game about 1.5 years ago, and I've been working on it intermittently since, primarily because I run a development company that's based over in India, and we do a lot of work for clients. We do artwork for a lot of internet games. We do a lot of programming work for companies that do advertising for their games. We did a Hellman's Mayonnaise game for Snapchat. We did a roofing game for GAF to actually teach people in Home Depot how to use their roofing tiles. So throughout the time, I do a lot of work for clients, and I'm able to mix into that the work on the Atari game. But as it gets near the end, I'm focusing more on the Atari game so that I can get it out the door and get it shipped. You know, my best advice is to stay focused and work at it. And my best advice for an indie programmer is to pay attention to the details. Many times in my career, we've had games and we sat with people and they would play a game and then they'd play a similar game, another game, and for some reason they would gravitate to the better game, and they wouldn't really know why this game is better, but it obviously was. And in my career, we've been able to extrapolate out that to be that the programmer took the time to make the features and the details really shine. So, you know, if you're writing a game with a little man who's running on the screen, take the time to make him feel right, to make him run correctly, slow down, put in some hysteresis as he turns around. Take the time to do the details of the physics and of every part of the game, because those little details will make a good game into a great game, and people will be able to identify that it's better. They may not know why, but it's always in the details, that if you focus on making each detail fine-tuned and play the best it can be, then you will end up with a great product. Just visit me at www.dankitchengames.com and sign up from my site. You'll get blog posts on interesting articles from me and interesting posts from my career, and you'll get updates on Tiki Vision's new games. So once again, dankitchengames.com, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, if you go on dankitchengames.com, you can see all his credits of all the games he's worked on. He has over 250 game credits. And there's so many games, from Atari to NES to Xbox One, Xbox 360, PlayStation, Game Boy Advance, so many. Even Earthworm Jim he had a little bit of help on, which is really, really cool. I hope he keeps making games. I hope he keeps doing what he loves. I hope Gary does the same thing, and the others from Activision, such as David Crane, Carol, and all the others. I hope they all have a great time doing what they love, either for Atari or for other games. Because I can tell they're all passionate about their video games.
Yeah, no, Dan is a great guy. When I had a problem with the whole COVID shutdown, didn't quite know what to do, didn't really know how to approach how am I going to pay the rent for 4 months being closed, and other people had suggested doing a GoFundMe, but Dan was the one who stepped up and said, let me write up something. Let me, I'll go out there as your spokesman, I guess, to introduce this to the public. And it was very successful. It helped us survive this long. Haven't been very busy, so obviously that was a big help. That made the difference of keeping this going.
Dan, keep making awesome games. I could tell you love making games. I could tell you love doing what you do. And keep inspiring, man. You inspired me to make a movie on you. You inspired me to collect Atari again. And you inspired me to hopefully make a game one day, which is actually my other passion.
What would I like Dan Kitchen to know? Well, if I haven't already told him, thank you. You've been a great help, a really good friend. One heck of an inspiration when I was younger. As I said to him the first day that I met him, you were one of my heroes when I was a kid, growing up. To Dan, Gary, David Crane, everybody who was actually involved not only with Activision but also in the rest of the industry, thank you. From somebody who is in his late 40s now, you made my life worth living, at least if nothing else, just to play your games.
I just want to thank Carlos and Frank for the time to interview me. I want to thank Billy for the use of Billy's Midway arcade. And I just want to say thank you to all the fans who enjoy playing my games. I enjoyed writing them probably more than you enjoy playing them, and look for more games from me in the near future.
So the cool thing is on this one is I'll put the title. All right, ask me some questions. Okay. Ask me a question. And I'm going to redo one thing I said earlier. So when I was playing Combat with Dan and a few other Atari games, that really made my day because I was going through a lot rough time. When I was playing with Dan with breathe. Okay, the lighting's still great. All right, even better. 2 more questions. What's your favorite Activision game?
No,
Okay.
no, it's too far. It's too long. I haven't played them in a long time. I don't know.
Okay. Any comments?
I mean, one that comes to mind is I can't even think of the name of it.
Pitfall 2?
No, one of the later ones. Look, bastard.
Yeah.
Beam Rider. Beam Rider.
What else can I talk about with Dan? Jamal, I need you to pause that. Dara put headphones on. That's okay. Okay, here we go. And this was made in New Jersey too, which is really interesting. But several of Dan's games were awesome. Many of Dan's games that he did after he left Activision were pretty cool. Bart Simpson vs. the World, Dan Kitchen's Tomcat, and many other games were pretty cool. He did games on Sega Genesis, he did Sega CD, he did NES, he did Master System's RC Grand Prix, was great, and so many other games. But yeah, after he left Activision, he did Absolute Gaming. But yeah, after Dan left Activision, him and his brother did Absolute Gaming. Special thanks to me for
Special thanks to Carlos for all of this painstaking effort to record these videos and edit everything and put it together and bring it out there for you people to see. Yeah. Now if you could just edit in my tooth so I don't feel like
Okay.
All right, say your name and what you do.
My name is Dan Kitchen, and I am a video game designer.
Yeah, I met Dan through Billy's Midway Arcade. He was such a nice guy, a great guy. He's actually a very big influence on me. He's very passionate about what he does. He's done so many games, from Atari to your phone to many other platforms. And honestly, he's what got me back to collecting on Atari.
I mean, I knew of him, and I knew he was a manager at Majesco, which is about 20 miles from where I live. And at the time, I was working for ADP, Automatic Data Processing, as a technical writer. And I would have loved to work for Majesco as a manual writer. And when ADP laid me off in June of 2001, I said, ooh, now I can go to Majesco. And I must have met Dan at a show and discussed it with him. And he had no positions open, so. And then I didn't see Dan for years, and then he started turning up again the last few years now, pushing his new game, and we became friends.
Yeah, the day that I met Dan Kitchen was real interesting. Mentioned something about Atari games and Activision games, and he says, oh, that's, I used to work for Activision. And it's like, really? And knowing the way Activision was with putting every programmer's name on the box and on the cartridge, I said, what's your name? And he says, Dan Kitchen. And I almost had to get scraped off the floor because I was blown away. Here was a guy who had actually been either the programmer or involved in programming or producing many of the games that I loved playing when I was growing up. And one of my favorite Sega Master System games was one that he was involved with when they were one town over as Absolute Entertainment. So it's very interesting. I love knowing him. He's been a great friend and a really cool guy.
I just want to thank Carlos and Frank for the time to interview me. I want to thank Billy for the use of Billy's Midway arcade. And I just want to say thank you to all the fans who enjoy playing my games. I enjoyed writing them, probably more than you enjoy playing them, and look for more games from me in the near future.
Learning how to program with the Apple II and see how big games were getting at the time. That's what really got him into making games from 1980 to now. And maybe 1979, but he started with the Apple II and then Atari and quite a few others. And Dan loves it. He loves making games. He loves programming. Back then it was a lot harder to program than now.
Dan is a great guy. When I had a problem with the whole COVID shutdown, didn't quite know what to do, didn't really know how to approach how am I going to pay the rent for 4 months being closed, and other people had suggested doing a GoFundMe, but Dan was the one who stepped up and said, you know, let me write up something. Let me, you know, I'll go out there as your spokesman, I guess. And it was very successful. It helped us survive this long. Haven't been very busy, so obviously that was a big help. That made the difference of keeping this going.
He's a nice guy and he programs great games, and I believe he's the first of the original programmers, the original VCS programmers, to program a new VCS game. Ed Fry came out with Halo for the 2600, so we have a guy involved with a new game who did an old game. But I don't think any of the original programmers for the 2600 came out with a new game now. And I believe that Dan Kitchen is the first one to do so.
It was actually for the Atari 2600, but it was created by ColecoVision, by Coleco. Coleco was looking for someone who knew the Atari to do it for the Atari because they had the rights from Nintendo for the game. And they seeked out, actually my brother Steve, who also was doing some work with Coleco. He was based out in California, and he knew that Gary knew how to program the system, so he subcontracted our little company in Gary's basement to write Donkey Kong. Reviews are very good. It sold a ton of units. It sold over 5 million units. At the time, and since then, there's been a rumor that it's not as good as the ColecoVision version, and that was because Coleco wanted that to be the case. I can assure you it's not. Gary wrote that game probably in about 3.5 months' time in 4K, and he put in as much as he could to make it as great as he could. He had a hard deadline to get it done for Christmas that year, so it's probably the best you'll see on the Atari within 4K. So.
So what was your first Activision game?
My first Activision game was Crackpots, which I wrote in 1982. I think it is. You know, it's certainly one of my favorite games because when I see it and play it, it kind of brings back the whole aspects of Activision and what it felt like to be part of them at the time, and it was a very exciting, fun time in my career.
What are your top 5 games you made for Activision?
Well, I'd have to say Crackpots, Kung Fu Master, Ghostbusters, probably followed by I worked with a chap on Commando and Akari Warriors. I would have to say those are probably my favorites.
Yeah, of all Dan Kitchen's games, my favorite game is Crackpots. It's one of the coolest games I played on Atari, and it's one of the few Atari games that really made me go, wow. I grew up with Donkey Kong also. I grew up with Donkey Kong on Atari back in the day. It was a lot of fun. I prefer the ColecoVision version, but this is pretty cool that Gary Kitchen actually wrote this. His brother wrote this. Thank you for watching, and check out some more of Dan Kitchen's videos in the near future. Alright, say your name and what you do.
My name is Dan Kitchen, and I am a video game designer.
So what got you into making video games?
Oh, you know, my father was always interested in electronics. He was always into antique radios. He built radios when he was in his teens throughout the 30s and then the 40s. And he got all of us interested in electronics early on. And from electronics, we then springboarded from there into our love of toys and games. And eventually, I bought an Apple II computer for Christmas in 1980, learned how to program, taught myself how to do it. And my older brothers were just getting into the field, so we all started, and the rest is history.
Were you glad you started with Apple II instead of a different brand?
You know, we started with an Apple II primarily because it was open. The actual case was open, and you actually could create different boards to plug into the system. And we were engineers, so we knew we would want to get to the roots and to the guts of the system. And that seemed to be the perfect system for what we wanted to do at the time. We were designing electronic toys and games, and a lot of them we would prototype on small boards that we would plug into the Apple and then write code to run them. And the open case and the access to the circuit board allowed us to do that type of engineering.
So what got you into Activision?
Interestingly enough, bought our first Activision game, I guess back in 1980. Which was skiing. And my brother and I were working at a place in Morristown with another chap who ended up writing Hero with us. And he came in one day and said, I bought some Atari games that aren't Atari. And we were like, wow. And we plugged it in, and it was amazing how beautiful the graphics were, how well it played. And we were hooked on Activision games. And at that design company, Gary, my brother, started looking at the Atari 2600 as a possible outlet to make products for. At the time, there was only Atari and Activision. Nobody else was in business to do that. Gary back engineered the Atari, learned how the system worked, and actually wrote his first game, which was Space Jockey. And the company we worked for made a deal with US Games to distribute the game. And at that point, when the game was released, Gary and I moved to his basement to start our own company. And about that time, soon afterward, he got the contract to write Donkey Kong for Coleco. And in the midst of doing that, we went to a Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, I think in January of '82, or it may have been June of '81. And we met with Activision, and Gary explained who he was and what we had done, and they were fascinated that Gary was learning the Atari on his own, and they liked the work he had done, and so we got a chance to meet with them, interview, and became part of Activision.
Was yeah, one thing you should know about me. Whenever I write questions, I have a lot of grammar issues. But yeah, I met Dan through Billy's Midway Arcade. He's a wonderful guy. He got me back into collecting for Atari. I actually stopped playing it for a while. Then one time, there was this time that me and Dan got to play a few games on Atari 2600, like Combat, Crackpots, and a few others. And he was cool. When we were playing Combat, we were battling each other. We got close. He actually said, "Don't fuck with me. Don't fuck with me." He won. But it was a lot of fun. And while I was playing Crackpots, he's like, come on, get the high score, get the high score, come on, come on, come on. Kind of felt pressure, but it was fun. But I really loved that night. I really treasured that night. And he's a great guy. I think personally, I think Dan Kitchen's one of the best game developers I know personally. He's one of the coolest people in the gaming industry I know. I know some complete jerk-off assholes in the gaming industry, and Dan is not like that at all. He's always welcome to talk about games and how he makes games or advice. He's very honest, which is great. I think, honestly, in my personal opinion, I think Dan Kitchen, along with the CollectorVision crew, are the best game developers I know personally.
One of my favorite Activision games was Beam Rider, but actually I played it on the Intellivision first. I didn't even own it in Intellivision, but I met the press reps from Activision at CES, and I got on their media list. So they were sending me review copies of their games, and they included a few Intellivision games in there, and Beam Rider was one of them, so I had to go get in television to play it, and I love that game. And then when they came out with the 2600 version of it, it's still a good game. I mean, it doesn't look as nice as the Intellivision one, but it's still a great game. Another one I like, I'm not a fan of Pitfall, unlike most people on Earth. I'm not a fan of it, but I do love Pitfall 2. Never finished it, but I think that's just a great game, and the sound effects are incredible.
So Gold Rush is a sequel to Keystone Keepers, a game that came out in the Atari many years ago, back in like 82, 83, which was a huge hit, sold millions. He started making that game back in the 80s, and then the crash happened, and then he saved the cartridge. He found the cartridge years and years later, and he decided, you know what, let me finish it up. Because Atari is coming back, there's a lot of homebrew games out there, and a lot of people want Atari 2600 physical media. So when he showed me the footage, I was impressed. The graphics are beautiful for Atari. It kind of looks like an NES game. The background moving, jumping across trains, it's really cool. And it's actually one of the most exciting games for the Atari. And it's one of my most exciting games for the next year. I assume it's coming out like 2021 or so, and he hasn't set a release date, but it's great. It looks great. It plays great. The music's awesome, and I look forward to playing it and reviewing it on my website. So, my top 5 games from Dan Kitchen. First is Crackpots. Second is Kung Fu Master. Third will probably be Ghostbusters on the Atari. I know a lot of people don't like that game, but I actually find a strange love for it. Another favorite of mine would probably be... the name is slipping my mind. The name is slipping my mind. It's on Atari. Ikari Warriors. And also Commando. Those are really cool games. I know Dan didn't have much to do with Commando. I know he helped produce it. But those are probably my 5 favorites from him. If Gold Rush was done, that'd probably be up there too. Um, not only has Dan helped me, he's helped Bill with the arcade when coronavirus hit. He actually helped put a GoFundMe for Bill Smith, raise a couple grand to help him with rent and so on. And I think that was really awesome. Bill was really appreciated that, and that really made him happy. And actually, that really made me happy because I love the arcade, and Dan does too, and Bill loves the arcade. And we try to keep it alive as much as we can. I know it's hard with this pandemic. A lot of businesses, but that was really cool. It's always fun hearing stories about him, like hearing stories of like how his brother made Donkey Kong on Atari, and how his brother got them both into Activision along with Steve, and how they made the games, and how it was only like one person making a game at a time. Like Dan did Crackpots by himself, Gary did Donkey Kong by himself. That took 3 to 4 months, 100-hour weeks, and so on. But it's kind of funny, like how it only took like one person a game compared to now, which takes like hundreds of people to make an Activision game. And I feel like back then Activision was much more creative. And I remember hearing Gary on an interview once say that he wants to heave when he went to the press conference and seeing every year fucking sequels over and over and over. So yeah, I have to agree with that. I really hope Dan Kitchen keeps making games. He's been making games since 1980. He's been involved in 260 games, and honestly, I look forward to him making more with Tiki Vision. Special thanks to Dan Kitchen and Tiki Vision for this documentary. Special thanks to Bill Smith for helping me and for being a part of this movie. Special thanks to Leonard Herman for being a part of this documentary and also developing the manual for Gold Rush. My name is Carlos William Gonzalez. And this is 4 Decades in Development.
It's funny. We wanted to do a classic computer club meeting for a while. Dan and I had discussed it. It was something I wanted to do right from the beginning when I first had the concept of doing this arcade. When you and I met, Carlos, at the show, right? And I had all the computers out. We have the picture of the two of us sitting together, and it was always something I was very interested in. That was the beginning of computers, for home computers at least. And so once I met Dan and we started talking about it, and he told me how he was programming Atari games on an Apple II, and because they both use the same processor, and there's a lot of the same commands involved in the programming. At any rate, for Dan to show up here, everybody who came brought a little something, whether it be just a couple of discs of games that they had from years ago or programs that they used to use. My friend Jeff brought his Hugh-bot robot, which Dan was fascinated with. It actually has a little built-in Atari 2600, so you could play games on the little TV screen. But yeah, Dan showed up with a box of old Apple discs, and we sat there with my Apple II and the disk drive and tried reading some of the old discs that he had, and some of it had original source code for games that he wrote back in the 80s. Yeah, it just for him to share with us some of the insider end of things from back in the old days just made that so cool. And to be able to sit with him and see that childlike joy in his face when we popped the disc in that he hadn't tried to use in probably 30-something years. I wouldn't even guess when the last time was, but yeah, he just was blown away that a couple of the games that he loved to play and games that he was working on developing, to see that code pop up, that was really neat.
Okay. When I was playing the Atari 2600 with Dan back in February 2020, I was going through such a rough time because my grandfather was dying and it was a really rough time in the world. And him playing Atari games like Combat, being competitive with me, me playing his game Crackpots, him cheering me on, and also telling me to get the highest score. That's okay. And him showing me like, hey, I made this game. Hey, I made this game. Hey, Steve made this game. Hey, Gary made this game. that made my night, you know, and that's probably one of the best times I had playing video games was that night, and probably my best memory of 2020. What happened?
It stopped recording automatically.
Probably ran to its limit. Then yours is probably different than mine. Mine's 29 minutes. Yours is 12 minutes. Let's see. I mean, I got what I needed for the trailer.
Inspiring, just what would you like to know?
What would I like Dan Kitchen to know? Well, if I haven't already told him, thank you. You've been a great help, a really good friend. One heck of an inspiration when I was younger. As I said to him the first day that I met him, you were one of my heroes when I was a kid growing up. You bought your Activision game and you saw the person's name on the cover. You open it up and inside of the manual was a picture of them and some little blurb about, something that they did or, an inspiring message or whatever they happen to throw in there as the text. He's been, it's really weird. I mean, to have somebody that you didn't know many years before, but you knew them from the game that they made, and now to know them personally is a real pleasure. It's a lot of fun. Some of the programmers that I've met now, being involved with doing the arcade business, it's a lot of fun. The programmers, the art guys. It's really cool to meet the people who did the stuff that we idolize so much. We treasure these games so much, and I think sometimes we forget that there's actually a person or a team of people who were involved with making that, and that was just their job. They could have done it a little bit less. They didn't always have to shoot for greatness. They could have just gone for mediocrity, good enough, get it out there. But that desire to do more, to make it better, is this fun? Are they going to enjoy it? Are they going to want to buy my next game if this one is this way?